me welcome you to this study hour today. It's coming out of Romans, the 13th chapter, verses 1 through 10, and it's how should I respond to politics. The point in this lesson today is reflect Christ and how you interact with politics and government. See, our country today, it is founded in God we trust. We're one nation under God, and we must continue to put God first as a country, as a nation. But I want to start where Brother Wayne made a comment last Sunday about a skunk and a lion, and how that skunk don't have enemies. Even though that lion may be hungry, it's not going to mess with that skunk because it has a unique power all by itself that all other animals won't mess with it. But then I began to think about a message that Brother Jonathan had preached, and he demonstrated. He brought two swords. He had a real sword and he had a foam sword, and he asked Brother Marvin to come up and to have a sword fight with him. See, but Marvin realized that the sword that he had was no match for the real sword. And as he turned away, see, Satan today knows that the power that we hold in our hands, and he knows that he's no match for Jesus. But when we realize the power that we hold, we can overcome any circumstances that we will face. David realized the power of God, and he defeated a lion. He defeated a bear and a giant. And even when the armies was watching on as he went alone to fight that giant. But God used one young boy to defeat a great warrior. We hold the power in our hands. Our country today is divided over very important issues, and each side of the political party is convinced they are right. As we look today, there's 435 seats in Congress, 34 seats in the Senate, and the highest office in the land in our country is up for election, the President of the United States. Not even including the local elections. And God has called his people to respond, not based on their emotions, but with actions that would honor God, honor government and its leaders. See, a love today for Christ and a love for others, it permeates every way we engage and express ourselves in the political party. Now, Paul had just got done explaining the implications of how believers should live towards God, and now he wants to explain how we should respond and view government and the authorities. So these believers, they lived in the heart of the Roman Empire, and it was not a bed of roses to live there. There was violence, there was cruelty in every corner, in the worst ways, and Paul addressed it here in Romans 13, 1 through 10. He addressed them on this matter. But I want to take you back over 80 years before that, when this really all started. And it came, and this is out of Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. And it said, it came to pass in those days, there went out a decree from Caesar Augusta that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Sinia was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, and to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was from the house and the lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with a child. And see, I want you to look today how God works out his plan and purpose. How he began to fill the Old Testament prophecies by using the government to force them to return back to their home country and their hometown. Joseph was forced to go back to Bethlehem so that Jesus could be born, so it would fulfill the Old Testament. See, it's always God's plan and purpose to carry out his will, because his ways and his thoughts are higher than our ways and our thoughts. And he's always working out his plan and purpose for our lives and for the government. Let us begin to read in verse 1. It said, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher power, for there is no power but of God, the power that be ordained of God." And these first 4 verses here is to respond to government with obedience. So that Paul began to address Christians here. He says, let every soul be subject to the higher power. This has a meaning that we should act with humility and submission. And this is that it should be a characteristic of a Christian's behavior. Not only how we respond, but how we reflect Christ and how that we interact with politics and government. See, this even includes the very way that we vote and who we vote for. Listen, Paul made 2 statements here about why Christians should live in submission to government authority. He says, "For there is no power but of God." When Pilate was questioning Jesus before the crucifixion in John 10, let me just take you over. John 10:19. John 19, verse 10, it says, "Then said Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee, and I have power to release thee?" Listen to what Jesus said. Jesus answered, and he said, "Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given to thee from above. Therefore he delivered me unto thee have a greater sin." See, we have the power to give by voting someone in office or not. Then they have power if they're voted in. Christians are today to acknowledge that all things that exist are under the authority and are ordained of God as the Creator and His authority over all of His creation. And He's the ruler of the universe. See, He's my King. He holds the office of priest, king, savior. You can't impeach Him. He's not going to resign. And He will be there longer than 4 years, because He is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. And He has the right to govern our people. And people should show Him respect towards Him, and even to those that are in authority that has a greater responsibility as leaders of our country and our nation. Now, this Roman Empire, it was not a peaceful place in the 50s. And every society today must have some form of government to guide them to a peaceful process to live in peace. See, Christians have the very words that God spoke, the Bible, to help them to maintain a higher standard, to be and to act different from this world. Verse 2, "Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation." The Jewish nation, they began to rebel against Rome in 2 costly wars, bringing damnation upon themselves, and it cost them more than 1 million lives. So whosoever here, this means that all of mankind, everyone is subject to God. Therefore, or for this reason, you resist the ordinance of God. This is that all power and authority belongs to God, because He gives or that He institutes that power to us. See, resistance also provides a military image of an ongoing person approaching to battle against someone or something. Here it was to oppose the ordinance of God. And Paul used resistance here twice. First, it was to stand one's ground against someone or something. And first, he indicates the crime of standing against God's command. As Christians today, it is wrong to resist authority, because God commands us to be submissive. And second of all, they that resist shall receive damnation. This is when they disobey God or the established authority. We bring judgment of correction upon ourselves. As Christians today, when we respond to government, this does not mean that we cannot protest policies and actions of the government that would dishonor God, nor does it mean that Christians must obey government. when doing so would be a sin against God. But this is that we expect the government to act within the boundaries of God's will. And as Christians today, we are subject to those that are in authority. In Acts 5:29, he says we are to follow God rather than man. See, this is not a loophole to get around the laws of the land or to disobey government whenever it suits us. Paul just reminded them to live in obedience as long as it doesn't cause us to sin against God's will. See, there's a lot in this statement. We begin to think about the abortion law, even what's going on now, defunding the cop, not listening to the authorities and the government in this pandemic that we're living in. We have a lot going on in our country, and our country is divided over many cases. And it's time for Christians to act like Christians. Verse 3, for the rulers are not terrors to good work, but to the evil. Wilt thou then be afraid of the power? Do that which is good. Then thou shalt have praise of the same. Well, here in verse 3, it says, for all of those that are in charge or are in leadership are not terrors to good work, but to them that do evil. And of course, unfortunately today, everyone that is voted in office is not perfect, of course, but the Bible says that we all have sinned. We all have come short of the glory of God, and we're all as filthy rags in the sight of God. But when Christians today, they submit to the government authority, we don't have to live in fear because of our conduct in obeying the law. See, we can have that peace about us to ensure us that the government will show hospitality towards us in most cases. And there are a few cases that the authority will abuse their power, maybe to make a name for themselves or just show the power they have. We see this today. But for those that do evil or have a bad conduct, this is anybody, including Christians, who demonstrate or disregard the laws of the land, should expect harsh response from those that are in authority. Let me give you an example today. If you were speeding today and you got caught, you would expect a citation or a ticket for not obeying the laws of the land. See, it said, wilt thou then be afraid of the power? Of course you are. Nobody wants to get a speeding ticket or any kind of a punishment. And see, you are called to do good. We are to live in obedience to the law that would result of a behavior that would be to keep fear away, so that we could receive praise and recognition and approval by God. Let me take you over to 1 Timothy. Verse 8 and 9. He says, but we know that the law is good. It is, if a man use it lawfully, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly, for the sinners, for the unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers, for murderers of mothers, and manslayers. And it even goes on a little farther. Verse 4, it says, for he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not a sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doth evil. Paul refers to the authority here as the minister of God, and he used this term twice in this verse. This is whosoever is in charge over you, and we can thank our president, our mayor of our town, our government, or preacher, maybe your boss at work, or supervisor and manager. They are to be servants of God, whether that person is in full control or whether they believe in God or not. They did serve God with authority. Let me go to 1 Peter 2. We covered this a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's important to go back and look at these verses. Verses 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 through 16, it says, submit yourself to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supremes, or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish man, as free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of malice, but as the servant of God. So the Roman Empire here, or the kings or presidents or our government, they are to do good. Our government is meant to serve society, for the people, to be a benefit for them. Let me give you an example of the Old Testament. We can see this when Joseph was made in charge of the land, because there was coming a famine in the land, and there was going to be 7 years of no crops and 7 years of plentiful crops, and how he began to plan, and he began to take in food through those 7 years of bad times and hard times, and he stocked up food, and it was to plan and prepare for the people, to help them through the hard times. But if people today, they begin to do something wrong, then God's servant would have to act in a manner that evil person would experience fear from the government officials. Be afraid or be terrified that if you've done wrong, you will live in fear of being caught and punished. See, Paul says the authority beareth not the sword in vain. This is that God has established rulers to both protect the law-abiding citizens and to punish those that break the law. Now, a sword here, it was worn by gladiators in this time, warriors, or those that was fixing to go to battle, but it also carries a meaning of judgment or a penalty for a crime, and also alludes the capital punishment. We know this was very common in this time period. And see, then the ministry of God this time is his role was to revenge and to execute wrath upon him that doth evil, to punish the one that does not obey the law by a disciplined action. Now it's like, example today, it would be like our courts today. If you go before a judge and a jury, it is to bring that right judgment against that one person or people. Now let me ask you, is the courts always right today? The judgment is always no? Of course not. It's absolutely not. But that person knows whether they did or was wrong, and God knows, and sooner or later you will have to pay down the road for that. And as long as you live on this earth, you will live in that fear. That's what he's talking about here. So verse 5, it says, wherefore ye must need be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. So these next three verses really responds to government with integrity, respect, and honor. Wherefore is to, for this reason or purpose, be subject or submitted to God and the authorities of government. Now he gives us two reasons here. First of all, we submit to God who ordained government, and to avoid wrath. That is handed out to those that would break the law. And this was for the conscience of each Christian. This is fearing God's wrath carrying out through the government against them, that if they did not obey, see, if we were not to obey government because of the threat of being punished, well, that's wrong. But we obey the government because it's the right thing to do in our lives. See, God used our lives to be a testimony of his faithful love, his unselfish grace, because the world, they are watching how we live. There are people today in this world, they don't know about God. They don't understand God's love at all. But they can see him through the life that we live in front of them. And when we live as Christians to be a good citizens, and they can learn of the faithfulness, love, unselfish grace, and then they can learn of the Almighty God that we love and we serve. And then we can be that witness that God desires of us to be. Verse 6 says, "For this cause pay you tribute also, for they are God's ministry, attending continually upon this very thing." See, Paul tells us to pay you tribute. Now, this means taxes, and I've already opened up with how taxes begin. And saying this is taxes on our homes, our land, our investment, that all people who lived in the inhabitants of Rome here or today, wherever you may live, you do this by paying it like a debt that you already owe. Now, in reality today, we're really never going to own anything outright in this life, because even though it may be paid in full, you're always paying taxes on something or on that thing. Except your salvation and your inheritance that you're going to receive in the new life to come in heaven. Now, the second here is the authority who receives and depends on those taxes to carry out their responsibilities to be God's servant. Now, an example of this is it's like the tribe of the Levites. They were the priestly tribe who were supported with tithes and offerings to provide for them. They were supported by taxes. See, the government authority were accountable to God for maintaining all beneficial aspects of society, and even punishment to them that done wrong. He said, attending continually upon this very thing. This is an ongoing action, or it's something that is always active. See, God uses the government for His purpose, and God is working out His plan in our lives. But many times in our life, we get caught up in our own life and our own problems, that we forget that God is working out and working all around us to make things happen within the government and our lives to work out His plan and purpose. We can't see that. Verse 7, it says, "Render therefore all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor." This verse, it serves as a summary really for Romans 1 through 6 here in these verses. But he concluded a specific focus on submission to government authority. Render therefore unto all their dues. There's no believer today exempt from financial duties. He says to all. This means that no government authority were denied of their financial support. They were due. So the thing that's going on in our world today, defunding the cop, should not be. We should be supporting them, because this is that we're free to choose. We're free to choose whom they would support, because we're under a divine obligation to support authority who would keep us safe and to keep the peace and order in the society that we live in today. Paul reminded them that all of this is ordained by God Himself. See, when this happened in Jesus' ministry, He was asked whether the Jews should pay the Roman taxes. What did Jesus say? He said, "Render to Caesar's the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God." Paul gives us 4 areas of responsibility. He said tribute really means taxes. Custom means tolls. Fear is to respect, and then honor. So tribute, taxes, customs, and fear, and honor. Now these first 2 areas, tribute and custom, they require a payment of money. And the second 2 require, the fear and honor, they require a payment of submission or attitude. See, the outward man is the resource of money in these first 2. But the inward man is the feeling of attitude they're at play. When Christians show respect and honor to those that we owe, they reveal the obedience to God's commandment to be submissive to the government authority. All right, let's move on. Verse 8 says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." These next three verses here, they really respond to a political discussion or disagreement with love. And we should apply these Bible principles in how we relate and respond to government authority, policies, and political issues. See, a love for Christ and others should be shown in every way we engage or express ourselves in a political party. Our actions will it strengthen us or it will hinder our witness. And see, in Matthew 5:13 through 16, it says that we are called to be the salt and the light of our community, our culture, our society. And during a political discussion, we can honor God by how we act, talk, by displaying a common courtesy, to disagree with a civilized way. But he goes on here and says, "Oh, no man anything." This is like a commandment to pay off all of your debts as quickly as you can. Let me take you over to Proverbs, to chapter 22, verse 7. It says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender." So we are slaves to whom we borrow from. But to love one another. They are only one exception, that love debt. It is never paid off. We can never repay Jesus for what he demonstrated on the cross for our sins. And there will always be a need to be addressed of love. There will always be a time for a Christian to love each other. And we do this by showing him that we are his disciples, by loving a brother, by loving one another. See, he that loveth another had fulfilled the law. Galatians 5 verse 14, it says, "For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." So let me also take you to James 2:8. He says, if ye fulfill the royal law according to the scriptures, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, thou do well. So as we begin to look at this, he that loveth another had fulfilled the law. Loving others fulfilled the whole law. And then in James it says loving others refers to the royal law. So if we take full advantage of this, we do well. And look today, we can think about every system today in our country, our nation, our county. It is made better when it is fueled by love. We have today a greater obligation to love as Christians than any other people in this world when we begin to love as Christians. Verse 9, it says, "For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandments, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Now, when he began to list these 5 commandments here, and each of these 5 commandments, they protected people from a political unrighteous conduct of their neighbors. But then he added, if there be any other commandment. Now listen, he made this clear here. He was not trying to single out one specific commandment to be more important than the others, but he was using this to illustrate his point here. And this is a great example. All commandments are summed up by the commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, if we just take care of ourselves and we begin to feed and clothe ourselves, if we would do this towards others, your neighbor, the same way that we regard by seeking and supporting and helping them, and whatever their need may be for them. See, we need to be supportive. This is what we are supposed to do. All right. Move to verse 10. It says, love worketh no ill for his neighbor, therefore love is fulfilling the law. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. It means nothing to harm or nothing to hurt them, so that your neighbor, it is that very, your neighbor could be the very one that living next door to you, or the person that you come in contact with down the road. Jesus gave an answer to this in the parable when he answered this very question. They asked him, who is your neighbor? And he told of the good Samaritan when he helped a stranger that was left on the road dead. And so the good Samaritan helped him many ways to take care of that stranger. But Paul made it clear here. He said, therefore love is fulfilling the law. Love seeks out to do what is right by our neighbors. Even when our political actions is driven by love for God and others, then we lose selfish attitudes in our political actions. Must lift up Jesus Christ. Our vote must bring him glory. And when we do this, we care about the things that God cares about. Christians today, we should never compromise our witness for a political agenda. We have the right to support politicians when they support God's plan. But we should also be willing to call out those politicians when they are wrong. And we should pray, vote, pray over and over again. And we should never serve a political party, but we should place a higher standard on our own life to be an example of the changes that Jesus works in our lives as we follow Christ. And as we go out to show God's love to our neighbors, I want you to think about this last thought. This is the thought I've had for a long time, and I thought, what is one vote among so many people? What's my vote? But in John chapter 6, let me read you a verse out of John chapter 6, verse 9. There was a lad here which had 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? Here was a boy with only a meal for himself. How would it be a help to so many people? What kind of difference could he make among these people? See, the difference is that Jesus used this one meal to feed 5,000 men, not including women and children. God delights in using just one. You may ask, will my vote make a difference? Or does it really matter? Or maybe my vote won't be missed. One person with God is a majority. You are just one. And you can do what's right. And you can do what you can because you can make a difference. See, there was a city in the Old Testament